Are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
We're good? Good evening, the hour being 7 o'clock on January 27th, 2020. Welcome to the Laconia City Council meeting, to our members in the audience, our visitors in the audience, and everybody viewing on YouTube. Welcome. First thing that we'll do tonight is have a salute to our American flag. I'd ask Councilor Lippman to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Council is joined by Recording Secretary City Clerk Cheryl Hebert tonight. I'd ask you to please call the roll.
Councilor Cheney.
Here.
Councilor Bounds.
Councilor Bounds is not here.
Councilor Littman.
I'm present.
Councilor Haynes.
Here.
Councilor Hamel.
Present.
Councilor Felch. Mayor Hosmer.
I'm here. Thank you. Staff in attendance tonight, City Manager Scott Myers and Finance Director Glenn Smith. The first order of business will be the acceptance of minutes from our previous meeting of January 13th, 2020. The minutes of the meeting were distributed to the City Council on Tuesday, January 14th, 2020, from City Clerk Cheryl Hebert. With no corrections or changes submitted to the clerk, the minutes will be accepted as distributed. Our second order of business under consent and action items, number 8A, a temporary traffic order, 2020-02 for the Laconia Little League Parade. A request has been made for a temporary traffic order for the Laconia Little League Parade on Saturday, April 25th, 2020, from 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. This is a recurring request, and there are no changes from last year. I'm requesting a motion to approve temporary traffic order 2020-02, Laconia Little League Parade, to be held on April 25th, 2020, from 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Councilor Hamel has made the motion, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor? Seeing 5 votes in the affirmative, the motion passes. This brings us to number 10 on the agenda, which is citizen comments for matters not already on tonight's agenda. Do we have any citizens' comments for items not on the agenda?
You missed
Okay.
number 9, Mayor.
I did.
That's a big one.
That is a big one. I wanted to get this one out of the way. I was real concerned. I thought I'd give it. Number 9, 2019 fiscal year audit and comprehensive annual financial report. The city auditors are with us tonight. They are Melanson and Heath, and with us tonight to make the presentation on the comprehensive annual financial report are Scott McIntyre and Patrick Mohan. I'd ask that you step up, if you would, to the microphone, introduce yourselves.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Scott McIntyre. I'm one of the partners or principals at Melanson Heath. With me tonight is Patrick Mohan. He's manager of the account here in Laconia, oversaw the day-to-day execution of our audit procedures and the test work that we applied to your accounting records. We're pleased to be here tonight to give you a relatively brief summary of the results of those procedures and walk you through your financial statements, noting the high points, as well as some recommendations we have for improvements. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and he's going to walk you through both the comprehensive annual financial report and our management letter, and then we'll be happy to try to answer any questions that the group may have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And again, going to be going through the highlights of the annual financial statements to begin with, and I believe you all have the document in front of you.
Sorry about
They're
that.
personally autographed.
Continue. I think we're all squared away now.
Perfect. Not a problem. Thank you very much for inviting us in here to be able to go through these numbers The city spends a fair amount of time putting this document together. Our procedure is to help the city compile these financial statements and also test these statements to make sure that they are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and then offer an opinion on those financial statements. Our opinion on the financial statements are that there are no modifications and that these financial statements are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and therefore are what we would consider a clean opinion, and much like every other year that we have presented here. And that would also be noting that we are in year 2 of the GASB 75, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement 75, accounting for other post-employment benefits other than pension, which we're going to be going over. But first and foremost, it's always worth noting that you have a clean opinion on your financial statements. With that being said, the MD&A is really a summary of the numbers I'm about to go over, but I'd like to go to page 14, which is the details. And page 14 is after the actual real numbers past the Roman numerals. And it's the statement of net position. And our focus is going to be on the governmental activities. And we're going to go right down to 2/3 of the way down to the net pension liability. And the net pension liability is just over $48 million. And that is tracking downwards, and that is worth noting only because the retirement system is still on their 30-year plan. They're down to approximately year 1920. They haven't really changed the discount rate, so their assumptions are fairly current, and they're on track. And based on what we know, the liability is continuing to track downwards. It's again based on proportionate share, because that's what we're about to talk to on the other post-employment benefits. Because it can change over time, it's based on your payroll, on how much you submit each month. So you continue to do what you do, but at the end of the year, when their actuaries, their accountants, and their auditors come in, they look at the total payroll across the state for each employer, and then they divvy up the liability based on each individual's members' share based on that. But the overall liability is trending downwards. So again, it's worth noting that they're continuing on track. The number just below that is the net OPEB liability, which is just over $12 million. That had a slight change last year, but again, it's year 2. Overall, it was fairly consistent. Just like to note that especially in year 2, there's 2 components to that. There's what we consider the city portion, and that is measured by your outside actuaries, and that deals with the implicit subsidy. That being that your retirees are allowed to continue on the health plan. They have to pay their portion based on the contracts, which is approximately 100%. However, the fact that they're allowed into your health insurance group creates essentially a liabilities on the city side, considered an implicit liability.
Just a question, I'm sorry to interrupt. What is OPEB?
I'm sorry, other post-employment benefits other than pension.
Thank you.
More closely related to your health insurance. And the implicit liability is just that, where the city is not going to make direct payments. So, but because those employees are by law allowed to stay on inside the city's pool with the active members, they've earned a benefit. But again, the city is not going to have a direct cash outlay for this, and it's measured by the actuaries. So that liability is going to continue forward until such time as they would choose to do something different with that particular statement. So the city does not have to fund that liability because, again, there's going to be no direct cash outlay for that. The secondary piece of that is the New Hampshire Retirement System's medical subsidy. That piece, very similar to the pension, is an amount that you pay in each month, again, with your retirement, and it has an unfunded portion, and that unfunded portion is passed down very similar in that your share is measured out by your payroll. Again, that has a funding mechanism, so over time, in theory, that should zero out. So by and large, after year 1920, you would be left with just your actuarial liability or your city side, your implicit liability. So over time, the retirement and the other post-employment benefit liability for the medical subsidy should, in theory, almost zero out. But again, that's very much down the line, and a lot of things can change in between now and then. But overall, you know, that's a $60 million liability on the balance sheet, and the direct effect on that is your total net position. And your total net position was holding at 24 million. The year before was 24.6. So overall, even with these big liabilities, the city was able to remain fairly stable as far as a total net position number. So those were the major highlights on the statement of net position. If we can turn to page 16. Page 16 really just have a couple key numbers here, and where focus is going to be on the general fund. The non-major is made up of your special revenue, your capital projects. There are no other major funds beyond the general fund. And our focus is going to be underneath the fund balance columns. Worth noting is your committed number of just over $3 million. That's your capital reserves. And then your unassigned fund balance of $3.2 million. And basically a measure of that is measuring that number against your expenditures as far as a ratio. And the ratio is generally to be between 5 and 17%. Again, that's a fairly large gap, but it's dependent upon the local decision in that, depending on how you're funding things, whether you're a city, especially using bonds, capital leases, depending on how you fund things, would be dependent on how that ratio would be deferred. And that percentage was 5.2%. So while you're at the bottom end of things, overall it's not too bad. The year before was 5.5, the prior year was 8%. Part of recognizing that, though, is the city has used and has continued to use over the last 4 years a fair amount of fund balance used towards the tax rate. Last year's amount was $835,000. The prior year was $835,000. The prior 2 years was $935,000. So anytime you're using fund balance in order to reduce that tax rate, you're subsequently budgeting for a deficit, and your plan is to replenish that. So at 5%, you're able to hold that margin. That is not too bad. Again, overall, a city this size, that's a fairly comparable rate as far as that percentage.
When does that 5% or whatever percentage it is become something that we should be really concerned about? Because 5% is the getting down there, isn't it?
Again, 5% is on the lower end, but it's dependent upon, you know, where the city is with funding certain infrastructure projects. You know, right now, you're probably in year 2 to 3 of some significant projects with streets and roads, bonding and things like that. So overall, you know, one of the measures, and Scott and I had just talked about, is, you know, your overall debt, you know, the size of the debt, you know, by and large, you know, over a 10-year period, the debt outstanding is going to be, you know, 73% of that is going to be paid off. With that being said, a lot of the projects, there's a lot of bond money already out there and being funded. You're using a lot of your fund balance towards some of those projects. So it's very hard to exactly say how low that number could go, because there's a lot of things that hinge upon that number, as far as your capital leases, the way you would like to finance some of those projects.
Is there a level at which you think we should start saying we should be uncomfortable with this?
If myself,
Yeah.
Again, not knowing exactly where not being part of the overall city planning as far as the infrastructure, that type of planning, how soon some of the vehicles, where, some of those fixed assets between DPW, police, fire, how soon some of those things have to be replaced. How are they going to be replaced? Are there going to be cash outlays? Are those going to be bonded? Is leasing some of that equipment, is that a potential? So that really does play into some of this decision as far as that percentage and trying to weigh that. And I'm not privy to some of those discussions.
Sure. So I think, just to jump in briefly, I think Patrick brings up a good point of when we should be concerned. I'd like to remind the council that was some of the moving parts with the Colonial Theater project over the last 4 years. We made the initial loan for $1.4 million to Belknap BDC out of fund balance with the intention of it being repaid when we turned around and loaned them. I forget if the number was $3 to $4 million. As we all know, that project's gone up significantly. Our total commitment to that project was $8.1 million where we ended. We only bonded 6.7. The 1.4 came out of the fund balance. So that's probably the biggest piece. That's the difference of when we were at the 8% fund balance to where we're at 5.2%. So it's certainly something that Glenn and I are aware of. We've spoken with the auditors, and that's why we will continue to make efforts to reduce the amount of fund balance that we use in budgets going forward to offset property taxes. But that really brought us from a level of 8%, which I certainly would be more comfortable with, down to that range where we can't keep going to the well, would be a simple way to put it.
But if I might, I think the question still hangs out there. Is there a number at which we ought to be starting to get nervous?
It starts with a 4, Patrick.
If
I understand what you were explaining, but I think I'd like to know, is there some sort of, upper limit?
If that upper limit or lower limit?
Upper limit.
It's lower limit is what you're interested in.
Okay.
Lower, I'm
Sure.
sorry.
No problem. In my opinion, if that percentage begins with a 4, I think the city should be concerned about that.
Okay, thank you.
Because I think rating agencies would be concerned about that.
That unassigned number, that committed number, those were the two major items in on the balance sheet column. A lot of the other numbers were very similar to the prior year, so there was a consistency amongst the figures between last year and the prior year. So, overall, the city, there's consistent results there over a 2-year period. And part of how it got there is if you could turn to page 20. Page 20 is the budget versus actual. Page 20 is really the report card of the city. It focuses on the budgeted revenues and the budgeted expenditures and the actual results, weighted against those. And in the far right-hand column, there's a variance column. Positive is good, negative is basically a shortfall or an over expenditure. And if you go to the middle, you can see that the total revenues exceeded the budget by $964,000. And if you can go 2/3 of the way down, you see the total expenditures. There was a positive number of $440,692, which means that's a turnback, unexpended expenditures. So,
Can you go to page 18, because I think the excess deficiency over revenues and expense in the general fund, we added a $544,000 from operations, plus some limited transfers in, which I assume are from the payments that we collect on
Impact fees?
impact fees. So in effect, the fund balance, if you just look at the general fund component, went up over $500,000 year over year. That's from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So just keep that in mind in terms of we were able to put $800-something thousand into tax relief, as well as improve our fund balance by over $500,000. I'm reading that correctly.
and I would agree, and that's where I was heading to on page 20, because in a
I
sense.
think you just want to send the right message here that things are getting better, not less, even though the percentage is a little different. It's because of other things that are going on the balance sheet.
True, and the overall total budget versus actual results were $736,000 positive, and that was after considering the use of fund balance of $835,000. So from a budget versus actual standpoint, the city surpassed the revenue projections and underspent on the expenditure. So that is a very positive note, and that is how that fund balance is staying, where it's at, in addition to the positive GAAP results of $544,000 as noted. So again, that budget versus actual is, again, a very good measure, as well as the GAAP reporting.
Thank you.
So if we can turn the page, we've got the proprietary funds, statement of net position. We've got the water fund and the sewer fund. Again, very similar results as far as, overall, both funds are very stable. In the third column, the internal service fund, we're going to get to a comment in the management letter where, overall, what we've seen is in the last 3 years, essentially, some of the billing hasn't been generating enough revenue in the internal service fund. We brought a comment forward that we're going to go over, but overall, last year's deficit was $300,000. This year's unrestricted is $601,000, and essentially it's growing over a 2-year period. A 3-year in 2017, that same number was $60,000. So over a 3-year period, that unrestricted number in your internal service fund has tracked upwards. So, but again, in discussion with the finance department, it's not an unknown item. There is a plan in place. It is being worked upon, but need to bring your attention to that. Your water and sewer funds, again, outside of your pension and your OPEB, those numbers are some of your biggest impacts. The user fees associated with both those funds are consistent, meaning the collections, which we test, the turnaround time are both consistent in both those operations, and overall, both are holding steady. What isn't reported here is the budget versus actual, because those funds are presented on the accrual basis. But again, from our testing, we do like to look at the budget versus actual because it's an important measure. You vote on the budget. So while it's not presented here independently, I have my notes on there. The water fund had a positive budget result, again, total of $187,000, and the sewer was much higher at a $900,000 level. Again, and that was after using $600,000 worth of fund balance, and that was used towards capital outlay projects. So again, both water and sewer projects are very consistent, both using monies towards capital projects and things like that, especially with the level of activity in the city. So the water and sewer enterprise funds are very consistent. The internal service fund needs some attention that's being worked on, but overall things are moving forward. If we move to page 24, I don't have a lot to say, but I just want to let you know that the private purpose trust funds, essentially those represent the monies that are held by the trustees. The private purpose is your cemetery funds and your scholarships, and the agency funds represent your student activity funds. They are included in your financial statements, and they are all included in the scope of the audit. So what happens there is we are looking at not only the bank statements, we're looking at the reporting of those, we're looking at the disbursements and things like that. So we are tracking those, and they are included in your financial statements. So those are the primary highlights of the financial statements. And
If I may add, when Patrick was talking about the first balance sheet that he asked you to turn to, I think it was page 14, your statement of net position. Then we went to the general fund. A key element in government financial reporting is that we have, you have, essentially dual perspective reporting. When we're looking at the general fund and you're looking at your general fund balance sheet, that's virtually all current assets and current liabilities. That's an important thing for readers to understand. That's what generates that fund balance, that unassigned fund balance. There's a whole nother way of looking at it, which is, I think it's page 14, that statement of net position. That brings into play the unfunded liabilities that Patrick was talking about in the, your proportionate share of the unfunded liability of the New Hampshire retirement system and your various OPEB liabilities. I just want to make sure that we articulate that so that you understand there's two different balance sheets. One's called a statement of net position, the other's called just the general fund balance sheet. They are related, but the key thing is, on that general fund balance sheet, there's no long-term liabilities. So one must look at that balance sheet, and it's the first place that almost all readers are going to turn to. They're going to look at your unassigned fund balance. Okay? There's a lot more to the picture than just that. There's that long-term balance sheet, as Patrick was saying, the statement of net position, and one must take into consideration, while his funding schedule is in place for those liabilities, those are still, in fact, long-term liabilities of the community. So I just wanted to try to bring some clarity to those two different balance sheets.
Going back to 14, current assets minus current liabilities, a current ratio, we're about 5 times there. Can you give us some perspective of how that would compare to?
Other communities?
Yeah. Compared to most businesses, it would be fantastic.
What the principal way that I don't mean to not answer your question, but
You can
based on my
answer it if you want to, though.
based on my experience, in addition to looking at the pension and OPEB liabilities that are on page 14, rating agencies then go to the second number up from the bottom. They're not so interested in the total net position, but what is your unrestricted net position? In yours, you see is in parentheses, it's just under $52 million. As Patrick said, you got $60 million in pension and OPEB liabilities. That $60 million is what is driving this to be a negative 52. I get asked all the time, so would we be positive in that without those two liabilities? And the answer is absolutely you would.
A few years ago, it wasn't there, right?
And a few years ago, it wasn't there. The counselor is right. I mean, Patrick spoke about this is only the second year that OPEB liability, the majority of that OPEB liability, has been on this balance sheet. And I think it was 5 years ago, the pension liability was buried on page 120 or something way in the back. And it didn't get anybody's attention. I think the rating agency, the GASB, who sets the rules by which you do your accounting and financial reporting, got it right by having that liability displayed on your long-term basis balance sheet.
So to follow up on Councilor Lippman's question, comparatively speaking, how does the city of Laconia look when we figure in our net pension liability and our net OPEB liability compared to other communities?
On the long-term perspective or the general fund basis?
Well, general fund basis, I think we look, you can give me both, but I'm primarily concerned about, you look at this debt, and the debt as a raw number is extraordinary. Of course, we
Yes.
know what the unfunded liability is throughout the state. It's also an extraordinarily high number. I'm just wondering how, it's all relative, I guess, but I want to know how we fit into this and how do we compare?
Your statement of net position, page 14, I think you have to take into consideration those two liabilities. But overall, I think it's a solid-looking statement of net position. I'm not prepared to tell you how you compare with the other cities in the state or even nationally. I just don't know that I've done enough analysis to really give you an answer there. A key thing, though, that Patrick talked a little bit about that I think can't be understated is the debt position of the community. And because this long-term perspective balance sheet, it has all your capital assets. Sometimes you borrow money, you sometimes and acquire or build capital assets with them. Sometimes you lease them, other times you pay cash for them. And all of those assets are represented here, as well as the outstanding debt. I don't want to say that a rating agency isn't concerned with how much debt a community has. I'm not saying that at all. But I think the predominant element that rating agencies will look for when it comes to a community's debt is how rapidly are you paying it off. And you have a pretty rapid payout schedule here in Laconia. 73% of your debt is paid off within a 10-year period. That's for your governmental. Water and sewer, I think, is even faster than that. It's
A low percentage of debt being paid off fast.
Pardon me, sir?
It's a low percentage of debt. If you go to the exhibit in the back that talks about what our borrowing percentage of allowed borrowing is. We're at a fairly low percentage, and we're paying
You're
it off.
pretty low percentage compared to what you are authorized by statute to borrow. A critical footnote, though, is over on page 45. And page 45 shows you, for the next 5 years and then incrementally for 5 years thereafter, how rapidly you're paying off your debt. So on the top of page 45 in the first column of numbers, you have total principal outstanding bonds of $37.2 million. That includes everything but the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund. And if you were to look underneath the row that says year 2025 through 2029, you're paying off 73% of your outstanding debt over a 10-year period. I will tell you, we work with a lot of communities, and sometimes that percentage is down towards 62, 63%. 73 is up there, and is in a good position to be in. And even with all the other things that we're talking about here, rating agencies are going to look at this note, and they're going to be pleased to see 73% paid out over a 10-year period.
And Scott, you said it excludes water and sewer, but that includes the school debts. When we talk about the city, the school is a department of the city, so that's all city school debt there together.
And can you refresh my memory on this schedule? The debt that's being paid off is net of the state contribution, or is this gross before we consider that as well?
This is gross.
So
Am I
I
right,
think the other
Pat?
thing, important point, if that's the case, is that, we happened to hit I think we were the last ship out of the, before the state cut off providing the building aid, and then we also were able to qualify, as Councilor Hamel said, for the QSABs, which had 0% rate of debt. So zero interest is easier to pay off than some other level of interest. And the fact that we qualified for, I believe it was 75% on the school aid on the,
I came in while you were in the middle of that, so I forget.
I
But
believe
part
it's-
of it was the technical school and
yeah,
part
the
of it was the high
technical school,
school.
I believe, came in at 75% state contribution, and QSABs, so the rest of it came in at 0% debt. So that's, I think, why we're able to pay it off so fast, is that we got in at the right time before state aid was shut off.
No, thank you. Excellent points.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Patrick. Any further questions from the council?
Are you done?
I just had one other document to go through, just very quickly, the management letter. And would just like to preface the management letter. It's a much shorter document. And the management letter is comprised of what we consider findings. And those would be the things that have come up during the audit. And some of those things are based upon the internal control testing that we do. The internal control testing is based on looking at everything from departmental receipt testing to your payables, to your journal entry testing, to payroll. Some of those tests either yield a yes or a no, and if they yield a no, we're required to, at times, to bring them to your attention. At that point in time, those comments can be classified as material weakness, significant deficiency, or other comments. And what you're going to see, material weakness being as a comment that you definitely need to rectify immediately, down towards other comments which are certainly need to be addressed, but much lower as far as the severity, if you will. And what you're going to find in the management letter is what we would consider other comments. Those are things that we found that we needed to bring to management's attention. And some were, and I'm going to go through them very briefly. Some of it is certainly due to some of the opening comment where we, certainly recognize the fact that there was a transition period last year. And some of the internal controls, especially in the first comment, reestablishing control of the journal entries in the general ledger, there was some change in the finance office.
Can we be a little more specific for the public? We had the death of a chief financial officer, and we had a temporary chief financial officer, and then we had another chief financial officer. So I think having 3 chief financial officers in a year's time to deal with a death needs to be, I think, it's a little bit more specific to say why typically we have no findings. And these are, as you said, minor findings. The fact that, you had a death and had to fill in with a temporary person and then get someone on, I think we did remarkably well to have this little bit of stuff.
And yes, and that's why we did, presenting that opening comment, recognizing the fact that certainly things are going to take time to turn some things around. And in the first comment, certainly reestablishing some of those controls, and some of that is just the closing process of the general ledger, just being able to get a set of processes in place. That's by and large the first comment. The second comment, improving the trust fund accounting. Again, that's been a work in progress. There's a lot of trust funds in the city of Laconia between the library and the city trust funds. All of that is on the city's general ledger. It all has to be reconciled to bank statements, and it all has to be updated in the city's general ledger. It's been an ongoing process. So again, when we look at things and we test them to bank statements, it is either a yes or a no. And if it's a no, we need to bring it to your attention. Again, improving controls over payroll. Again, these things can all be rectified. They're all seen as other comments. Typically, that's not something seen here, and it's part and parcel to that changeover in the finance office and having 3 different people in there, and certainly, certainly the death of the finance director, certainly impacted a lot of things, as everyone knows. So
It wasn't a planned event where you have a lot of transition time. It was just picking it up from a very difficult situation. So give our
Correct.
people credit for,
Yeah, and Patrick and I, we talked about this, and, we have a professional responsibility to bring things to the city's attention. But as he indicated, we put that opening comment in there, that there were 3 different people at the helm of the ship during fiscal year 19. That's a driving force here, undoubtedly, but we also just knew that we had our professional responsibility.
and we appreciate that you bring it forward. Just want to give the public the context of a few minor things, and it wasn't that there was any things that were inappropriately accounted for. It was being behind on work.
correct.
As, if you turn to page 4 of your management letter, and you talk about 2, improving trust fund accounting, has that been a regular comment of the management letters that we've experienced over the last few years? Are we getting a better handle on it? What?
It was there 2 years ago,
Okay.
but with the again, I consider it the transition, certainly, there really hasn't been, I don't believe, a fair timing in order to get to that issue in going forward. But it has been there, meaning that when we look at things, we look at those general ledger accounts and compare them to the bank statements. They certainly weren't agreeing in the past. And there was other things that were in consideration, whether the transfers might have been netted down, and there was other various things going on. So yes, the comment was there, I believe, 2 years ago. I'm not sure about a 3rd year. And we're bringing it forward again in the current year, and look to, see improvement there in moving forward.
Well, I'm just wondering if we're making some progress here, or if we're standing still, or if we're getting.
I think
We're gonna-
I think you probably took a step backwards in FY19.
Okay.
Given the things we've tried to outline here from our opening comment. But in FY20, we think the city can but certainly needs to get a better grasp of the reconciliation between the state forms, that are called the MS-9 and MS-10 forms, bank accounts, and the general ledger.
Patrick, my question has to do on page 5, which is address the deficit in the internal service fund, which indicates a cash deficit of approximately $600,000. Can you shed a little light on that situation, if possible?
Yes. In the current year, at the end of the year, there was the cash deficit of approximately $600,000. In the prior year, it had been $321,000. And what that represents is the internal billing of the departments that need to pay over to the internal service fund that is related to the motor pool, by and large. And essentially, the costs that are associated with the internal service fund exceeded what the billing was, what billing was being done. So as far as the comment, and it's been talked about, it was talked about during field work, there is an acknowledgement with the finance department as far as a plan. It was there last year. It grew, so we needed to bring it to the attention of the board, this year. But again, having 3 different finance directors, the FY19 was, again, not a year that was going to be able to take place. And again, a plan needs to be in place. It's not a case of just presenting bills to the general fund. It's a bit more complicated than that.
I think it's important on that one, though, in particular, there are certain assumptions that go into the life of the assets and how it's being built out. And to the extent that, the life of our assets and the deployment of our assets have typically been longer than the depreciative life, that, the deficit is a non-cash expense, and
Actually, if I may, Counselor, the deficit that we're talking about is really it's a cash deficit for this fund. An internal service fund, by definition, accounts for a lot of the interdepartment or interfund activities in a community. So the work might be done by a particular department, and all of those costs are tracked in this internal service fund, and they need to bill 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 10 different departments within the city.
But if I'm depreciating a car at 4 years, that lasts 5 or 6, then, it isn't necessarily what it appears to be, is my point.
Depreciation is a component here, but that is
What is the largest expense of capital purchases, the depreciation on the equipment?
But what's being billed out to the departments isn't really the capital expense. What's being billed out is the cost to service some of those assets, the repairs and maintenance and things like that are done by this entity called the Internal Service Fund. Yes, depreciation is recognized there, but depreciation is a non-cash expense, as you know, and it's the cost to provide the services to maintain the assets that are designed to be billed to the multiple different departments.
So outside of depreciation, this is an internal process, opportunity to improve an internal process so we reduce, if not eliminate, the deficit.
Correct, because you have that roughly $600,000 cash deficit, and it's probably because the entity called the Internal Service Fund hasn't billed on a timely basis all of the other departments within the city of Laconia.
Okay.
And those departments could be general fund departments, or they could be your enterprise fund departments.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt
Okay.
you.
I don't see it as big an issue as, I think you're appropriate to bring it up to us, but I think in terms of financing and servicing the expenses, if we had an expense and taking care of a vehicle, it's been paid for. It's not like we haven't paid a bill.
The risk is that, yes, the city hasn't not paid a bill. There's a double negative in there. But the issue that we're seeing is that this entity needs to bill the other city departments. And if you did that, and a portion of, if we take, for example, a portion of that 600,000 probably should be billed to the general fund. And that would be an additional expenditure of the general fund.
And where does that money go? To the left pocket, to the right pocket? It doesn't disappear from the city.
It disappears from your general fund because it needs to come over here to the internal service fund and wipe out the
And
deficit.
the internal service funds on our books. I mean, I guess, I get your point. I'm just think that it's important for the public to understand that all the bills have been paid and there's no cash missing from any place.
We are definitely not saying that. We are definitely not saying that. But if you have two different entities, the general fund and the internal service fund, one has cash, one has negative cash, it probably means that this entity owes this entity the money.
But I have a left pocket and a right pocket, and if I have $50 in this pocket and $50 in this pocket, I still have $100.
You do, but if we get back to unassigned fund balance in the general fund, that was 5-point-something%, and you need to pay off that cash deficit in the other pocket. Now what happens to that unassigned fund balance when you've recognized another $600,000 in expenditures in the general fund to make the other fund whole? Then it comes back to that general fund. That, I think, is the critical way to look at it. I understand it stays within the coffers of the city. That's why you have two different balance sheets. You have the government-wide with everything all of your funds sort of put together. But you still have the dual perspective fund reporting, dual perspective reporting, and you have the general fund and you have the other funds. And with a deficit out there, you really got to take a look at getting that funded to make sure that the general fund, doesn't really, in fact, owe that money over to the internal service fund.
Counselor Hamel?
Just a quick question. On the internal service fund, so the drift I'm getting is that we are billing the different departments for the expenditures of service to them, and that money's coming in from the different departments. Are you saying that then that the cost of the vehicles are not part of that? In other words, there's a cost to all these vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So is that coming out of the internal service fund? Or is that we're just billing for services and then this cost is just being paid out of the general fund? Which could accumulate that pretty quick.
We don't believe that the cash deficit is a result of financing the vehicles in your example, Counselor, through the internal service fund. We think the cash deficit is a result of not invoicing the departments for the services on those, not for the acquisition of them, but for the service on them.
Okay.
Are you finished, Patrick?
Yes, I'm finished.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or concerns for Patrick or Scott? Thank you. Oh, yes, sir.
Just want to have Glenn speak for a minute. Obviously, he's the finance director, and he's the third one who came into the mix last year. And obviously, you got to prioritize, what happens when you're coming into the job, and then also pick a date and set new fiscal controls and policies going forward. So I want to leave you with some of the things that Glenn and his team have been working on, so you know that this wasn't a brand-new surprise to us getting this letter in January, that some of these improvements have already been implemented. So I'd like to have Glenn just speak to it a little bit.
I also think there's probably an appreciation all around this table of Glenn coming in and doing the job that he's been doing, put in a difficult situation when things happened unexpectedly. So the last thing I want to do is leave you with the impression, Glenn, that somehow we're being hypercritical of what's going on in your department and your job performance. That's certainly not my intention.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. And I just want to reiterate what's been said all along. But first of all, say how much I appreciate having Melanson Heath here. It's a very good, very reputable firm that I think bends over backwards to work with the clients to try to get things to where they should be. That said, there's been a lot of talk about the year of transition in 2019. And, when we came in, there was a deal prioritization that took place. And I'll say there were some things that some instances where we saw a deficiency. It was late enough in the year that we said, okay, we're just going to start next year afresh with that. And I think you're seeing some of that here. and we're going through, so I can guarantee that a lot of the statements, particularly in number 2 here, and you're going to see a lot different, and those changes have already taken place and are already in place for this year. And the only other thing I just want to acknowledge is what's been said before, and that is with the Internal Service Fund. I think that's an ongoing program, problem that is probably going to take several years to fix. And I think just my kind of off the cuff analysis of that is that what's happened is that I think, with all respect, I think the billings are taking place. It's just that over the years, the billing rate has not kept up with the increase in expenses on that side of the fund, and that is what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Scott.
Mr. Mayor, can we
Thank you.
ask Scott and Glenn to just talk us through page 80 and 82?
Yeah, I was just looking at that. So the
82?
Percentage of debt,
80 and 82.
Yes, absolutely.
percentage of debt is still very low. 8%.
So tied into state law, and based on your assessed valuation, you have legal debt limits that are allowed. So actually, it probably spells it out for you in numbers on page 79 if we go there. So the base valuation is based on our citywide assessment. That's the $2,337,000,000 figure. So under state law, a community can have a debt limit of 3% of its base on the municipal side. And so 70 million is what the maximum limit is the city could be bonding, again, for general fund purposes based on its assessment. And there's other formulas for the school. The school is 7%, I believe, in there as well. So you could see what potentially, we could be bonding, and then you could see the actual amounts, coming in on page, you can look at them at page 81 specifically, and page 82 over how much principal is out in interest and what our total payments are for any given year. So going back to 2010, and I'm on page 82 here, you can see that our principal and interest payments equated to 7.9% of our general fund expenditures, and that's a good calculation as to how much of your total budget is going to principal and interest payments. You can see 10 years later in 2019, even though our principal is flat, our interest is up a little bit, our total payments are about $300,000 a year more than they were in 2010. You could see that as a percentage of our general fund expenditures, we've dropped from 7.9% down to 7.1%. And I think there's another chart in here that breaks it down on the next page breaks it down on a per capita basis. So again, you can see that the city has been fairly conservative in its borrowing. As the auditors mentioned, we've been rapid in our pay down amount. And not that I think anyone's going to recommend that we would ever go out and bond up to the limit. It shows you that we're in a very solid position.
So we have a credit limit essentially of $70 million,
Which we're using 17.
of which you're using 17.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
And that's pretty good.
And a rapid pay down, as you heard, 72, 73% paid down within 10 years.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Scott, and thank you. So that was 9. We've already covered 10, by the way, which is citizens' comments. We have no interviews tonight. Nominations, appointments, and elections. We have 2 for the library board reappointment, which we interviewed at our last meeting. Taking up the first one, Bruce Knurr, who is seeking a reappointment as an alternate member of the Library Board of Trustees to a term expiring at the end of March 2021. I'm looking for a motion to reappoint Bruce Knurr as an alternate member of the Library Board of Trustees to a term expiring at the end of March 2021. So made by Counselor Felch, seconded by Counselor Hamel. Discussion? We'll take it to a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, none opposed. Bruce Knurr is reappointed as an alternate member of the library. The second reappointment this evening is for Marie Bradley. I'm looking for a motion to reappoint Marie Bradley as a regular member of the Library Board of Trustees to a term expiring at the end of March 2023. The motion made by Counselor Lippman, seconded by Counselor Hamel. Any discussion? Ready to vote? All those in favor, raise your hand. That's 6 votes in the affirmative, none opposed, and Marie Bradley has been reappointed as a regular member of the Library Board of Trustees. On 12C, request to appoint Kathleen Collins as Ward 3 moderator. Looking for a motion to appoint Kathleen Collins as a Ward 3 moderator for a term expiring at the end of November 2021. Counselor Lippman, seconded by Counselor Felch. Any discussion? All those in favor? 6 votes in the affirmative, and Kathleen Collins has been appointed to Ward 3 moderator. Taking us to...
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
just looking to our clerk, we're still looking for a clerk for Ward
A
3.
ward clerk for Ward 3, yes.
So if you know someone in Ward 3, I've been recruiting, looking for some help there.
Terrific.
Thank you.
I believe we have nothing on for public hearings tonight. Taking us to 15, which is the mayor's report. Just a couple of things that I'd like to get the council and our people viewing up to speed on. First of all, in the Water Commission, we are interviewing candidates this week to replace Seth Nuttleman, who stepped down as superintendent. And we are pleased with the number of applications and the quality of applications. So we'll be working on that this week. Second of all, Laconia Airport Authority. I see Marv Everson here with us tonight, and I think that's great news, and he'll be staying on, we hope, for the next year. We've had some discussions recently, so Marv, it's good to have you on board for another year, and great job with the work you've been doing out there. Thank you. Also, a couple of items that took place in Concord last week in regards to the state school property. Two really very good bills were filed, one by Representative Spanos, which is HB 1224, which is a funding mechanism to continue the work of the commission that was set up to begin the process of developing the property and transferring it to private hands. The second one is SB 635, took place in the Senate. I'd like to thank Councilor Cheney, was at both hearings and signed in favor. It's always good to see folks locally following this and tracking it and signing in. And SB 635 was the Lakeshore Development Authority, which is based on the template of the Pease Development Authority, and putting a long-term, relatively long-term structure in place so we can begin the next phase of the development of the property in regards to infrastructure oversight. There is, that passed the ED&A committee in the Senate unanimously on the day that Councilor Cheney and I were there, which is great. It should be on the floor of the Senate this week, and then move to the Senate Finance, where we'll have a hearing on the cost of the fiscal note associated with it. So just getting you up to speed, there's some great stuff going on in regards to Laconia State School property. It's long overdue, and again, thanks to Representative Spanos and Senator Morse for the work they've put in, as well as our local delegation who co-sponsored the bill as well. So greatly appreciated. That's it for my mayor's report. Any committee reports? Seeing none. Liaison reports this evening? Yes?
No,
No, you sure?
I'm positive.
Okay.
Praying. That's
I was just saying, no committee reports, yay.
Mayor?
Yes, sir. Yes, Counselor Hamel.
We do have a couple of, what am I doing? Okay. I'll do Parks and Recs first. I attended the meeting Tuesday night, and they are going rapidly through a lot of requests for parks and the Rotary Park for weddings and things like that. They will, I believe Amy's here tonight to discuss repurposing of funds from O-Pee-Chee Park field to be put into different areas, and I'll let Amy do that. That's why she's here tonight. I don't want to take her thunder. They are moving rapidly ahead on the Bomb Beach redesign. They had to redesign for handicap access, which was omitted from the previous thing. Design has been submitted, and I guess just waiting for approval or to be gone over. There've been many requests for using the weirs, the parks here and that there, which they are working their way through. The other meetings I went to the Colonial meeting on that Tuesday morning, and an update on that is all the roofing materials for the theater roof were hoisted up on Monday of last week, and the crew has been there working at it very hard. So they're working on that, the highest roof first, and then they work their way down to the other roofs. Abatements are proceeding very well. They're about 75% done. There's still a lot to do here and there. The demolition of the theater inside portion of what needed to be removed is pretty much all done. The condo units in the front, they're in the process of demoing that to the walls. That's how we, it's in a contract for that to be to the walls and then rebuilt from there. The frescoes on the ceiling and the molding and all that there is it's just an amazing thing to watch. I've been up there 2-3 times now, and to watch these people from week to week, it's mind-blowing to see what they're doing. I mean, last week I was up there, and they were just removing some of the old paint from the centers of the ceilings and stuff, and they've already all been repainted. The moldings have been repainted. They're fixing the cracks in the walls, the plaster, I don't even know what you call it, but moldings around the stage that go from the ceiling to the floor, parts missing and all that. They made new molds and remolded all that, and it's in place already. So they're really going pretty strong on that, which is really nice to see. It's going to be pretty spectacular. Electricians, plumbers have been on there, going right at it. And also, I spoke to the city manager, and we contracted a Mark McNamara, who has a recording company, video recording company here in Laconia, and we contracted him to do a historic filming and documentation of the refurbishment of the Colonial Theater.
That's a great idea. Great. Good.
He gave us a price. The contract's been signed by him and city manager, and the funding for that is almost all intact. 75% of it has been promised, so we're just working on a little bit more, but it'll be funded privately, not through the city. So that's kind of where we are now. There's another meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, so it'll be interesting to see what they did today overnight. So the project seems to be going very well. There's other things coming up very soon as far as theatrical equipment, rigging, lights, speakers and all that kind of stuff that we're kind of muddling our way through now, but it's going very well so far.
That's great to hear. Councilor Hamel, thanks for taking the lead and getting involved.
As long as we're talking about the Colonial, I guess I would like an update, if there is one, in terms of where the committee is at and what kind of structure we're going to be looking at for programming in the future, where that's at.
I'm glad you brought that up, Councilor Bonds. We had our first Colonial Steering Committee meeting last week to refresh everyone's recollection who's part of it. Mayor Engler is a member of the committee, Karen Pryor from the Belknap Mill, Elizabeth Howard, Jared Gamet, Christopher Boothby, hopefully Rod Dyer, but he's on a Mediterranean cruise right now and won't be coming back for a Colonial meeting. He let me know. So those are the people that were either attended or on the list to attend our first meeting. I think we had a robust discussion about what the management might look like of the theater. And we've had, I think, a very good discussion about, is it a full-time in-house person who's going to be manning the theater, starting in this summer to begin the programming aspects. That'll start hopefully in 2021. Is this someone that a booking agent who is not a full-time person there but is looking for acts and bringing them in? I will say right now, we have a meeting, our second meeting this Wednesday. Everyone on the committee was tasked to do a couple of things and bring some information back to the committee as a whole. I think ideally what we would probably like to do is craft an RFP of sorts from the city, asking for outside input and proposals as to perhaps how they see what they think the best way to manage the theater would be, and what they would look for some form of compensation. So we haven't gotten to, we've started a draft of the RFP, but it's still a very early stage there. But we know that time is of the essence. This is something that ideally, maybe we should have started it some time ago, but it wasn't. So we have an accelerated process in place right now. We're trying to move quickly, but not trying to avoid big mistakes as well as we go forward here.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, any other liaison reports or questions? Let's move on to the city manager's report.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Oh, citizens' request for comments. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Citizens' request to comment on current agenda items. Anyone here in the audience that would like to speak about current agenda items tonight? Seeing none? I knew that. Okay. The city manager's report is next up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just continue on the Colonial theme for a minute. Along with that RFP, we've got John Gardner, our purchasing specialist, assisting. I know John sent over a couple of templates, and we'll, as city staff, support whatever work the steering committee needs for going out for any RFP information. Glenn's gotten me a very preliminary next fiscal year budget draft, so we're certainly looking to plug in numbers for operational cost for the Colonial for at least a half a year of the budget if we do open on January 1. So we're already looking at that, and we'll pay attention to what the steering committee does in case there's any additional funds besides just, the basics of lights, heat, insurance, those types of things.
Can I ask that I be included on that information, the RFPs and?
Certainly, when an RFP goes out, we'll be happy to copy the whole council on that. I'll give a plug for our website, and the city clerk loves this. You can actually go onto our website, make an account, and one of the selections on the menu is you can be notified on any RFP or particular RFPs, and you get a little email that comes to your inbox that says, hey, we put out an RFP. I'm just saying, it's not just for councilors, it's good for the public.
Bruce, can you handle that for Councilor
For the
Bounds?
RFP that goes out, I'm asking for the information.
I'm just plugging our ability on our website.
You are just.
Because I'm probably the most tech-savvy guy. No, I'm not the most tech-savvy guy.
Hot on that mic.
All right, so I'm going to go into the project update, which is included in your packet. A lot of planning work going on here in the winter for road projects, so we'll be rolling that out over the next month or so. The timeline for the three big projects is the state bridge replacement of the Route 3 bridge in the Weirs over the railroad track is slated for this spring as conditions allow. We just got an email today that there is a pre-construction meeting going to take place at the Guilford DOT building coming up in early to mid-February to talk about that. Targeted, I believe Wes shared with me, April 6th or April 13th, somewhere in that area, weather allowing would be when that project will begin. And again, we will be getting information out. Once that project's complete, the next big one is the continuation of Union Ave from where we stopped in front of Irwin's to carry it all the way to Stark Street. And then finally, when that's complete, we'll be doing the Durkee Bridge replacement on Court Street, and that'll be a fall project. So in and around there, we'll be rolling out the additional, road paving, shims, maintenance overlays, those types of stuff to come up.
So those will not be simultaneous
1,
jobs.
2, 3, freestanding, no overlap.
Just checking.
A couple other
More
things.
fights in the street.
Councilor Hamel already commented on the Bartlett Beach, that we're working on some updates for the re-engineering, and we'll look to do the review of the revisions when they come back. We also have the Bartlett Beach wet bins permits have all been approved, and we'll be going out to an RFP that, again, you can get notice of in your email when we go out. We'll probably put that RFP out for the similar type of work on Bartlett Beach a little later on this winter into spring, so that anyone looking to bid on it will be able to go and walk the site, hopefully without snow on it, and get a better visual of it. So we're in good shape, and we're just waiting on the timing of that a little bit. The final signs, the Welcome to Laconia signs, have all been installed. I have seen at least 2 of them. I'm not sure I've seen 3 and 4, but I've been told they're up in the same space as the other ones were and looking good. And then finally, I signed today, after review from several interested parties, the application for the Pearly Pond improvements and maintenance that Risk Frost Shumway is working on. So that is signed and back at Risk Frost Shumway to submit to the state. Your economic development report, again, unemployment rate, again, we're still continue to be at historic lows all across the board. We do have on the second page of that report the final consumer price index, so the inflation number for December came out in early January. So we know that inflation for the prior 12 months annualized at 1.8%. So that, along with where we end up with the new building permit value for new construction, which will be complete at the end of March, again tied to the state assessing year, Department of Revenue Administration assessing year. That'll be the second component. Both Glenn and I met with our counterparts at the school, so the superintendent and the business administrator went over some preliminary tax cap numbers, so they're in a good place as far as what they're working toward with their budget right now as well. 2 additional items just to bring to your attention that are not in your packets for tonight. One is the executive director of the Laconia Housing Authority, Dick Weaver, is retiring. Dick has been on board here, I want to say, probably around 7 years, give or take. I've really enjoyed working with Dick and his team and some of the projects that they've been on. So congratulations to Dick on his retirement, but we will miss him. And then also a city manager appointment to a vacancy on the Personnel Advisory Committee. I am appointing Corey Hoyt, who is a Laconia resident in Ward 4. Corey also grew up here and went to school here, has a lot of background in personnel management, a direct supervisor, hiring manager. He's nearly complete with his MBA at UNH, and he already has a master's in communication, so a little bit of an underachiever, but we're thrilled to have Corey come on board and help us out there. So happy to take questions on that or anything else this evening.
Counselor Cheney.
I regret the appearance of an ambush, but I was hoping the manager could review and speak to in fairly short order, because this is being heard, I think, at the end of the week. SB 633 talks about recovery housing, and I have no idea. I tried to look it up and couldn't find it, but I was hoping you could take a look at it and
I will. I think I recall reading an article in the Union Leader in the past week or so that I think may be tied to that particular bill, and I think it came from one of the public safety officials in the city of Manchester, if I'm not mistaken, and they were talking about the number of recovery houses, sober houses, whatever, that are in the city, that right now there's no requirement to have them be registered or even to have a database of where they are type of thing. So I believe that's the gist of it. You said that was Senate Bill 633?
633.
I would be happy to get a little information and.
And keep track of where it goes.
Yes, absolutely. I'll put that on my.
And the other one that I had some interest, I think we should all, is House Bill 1481, which talks about net metering. I think it only talks about net metering for individuals, but it was an issue, if I remember from a year ago, having to do with our piece of property in the Weirs that we look to lease out.
Yes, so we are still moving forward with our solar garden array down there. The challenge was that there was a bill that passed both chambers dealing with raising the megawatt allowance of a net metering project from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts. And it was vetoed by the governor, and I believe the Senate overrode the veto, but it failed in the House, if memory serves me correct. So anyway, it didn't, and I think there might be a slightly different iteration that's through the works right now, but that is one that's on our radar. In talking with our folks, they are, help me out, Wes, they're through the planning board process. They've submitted engineering plans to DES, and DES has like a 120-day window or something to.
120 days from 2 weeks. They got to update the plans.
Okay, so we got some minor updates, and then DES has a 120-day window in which to offer comment on, and then there might be something else. The long and short is that our folks feel that they would be starting installation of the project this fall.
And
Yes,
I
this fall
thought that they-
is the target.
I thought that they had stopped because of the legislation.
They did, but they found a way to, I don't want to say it was the project was broken into two pieces, so it stayed under the limits, but there was a way that they could structure the project under existing regulation, and I think they're confident that something else that's going through the legislature, it might have been the bill that Councilor Cheney was referencing, is going to get them there. So they have continued their work and investment of their time and resources to design, engineer, and get this to DES in a couple of weeks. So
See how much I don't know, but that's a good thing. Thank you.
And that's the same project they were planning before?
it might be a touch smaller, not significant, but just a touch smaller. I think it might end up at 3.8, and we were thinking 3.4, and we were thinking 3.8 or something. So a touch smaller, but the lion's share will be there.
It doesn't affect how much they agreed to pay the city, though, right?
It is, because there's a certain dollar amount per megawatt generated down to the percentage. So I think between what was going to be a pilot and what was going to be a land lease, the full project was slated to be about 45,000, 45,000, and I think we might be somewhere in the 85% of that range. I haven't seen the final number, but we might be down around 38 to 40,000 on the revenue now.
Per year?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
And I believe at the end of the day, there still would be some room to build out some more if you know, the conditions lined up for that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilor Cheney?
That's it.
all set?
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I just want to comment that with an annualized year-to-date rate of 1.8%, that I hope you're looking forward to the challenge of meeting the tax cap for the upcoming budget. You know how much I love that.
I know you do, so we're strongly encouraging folks to come out and pull building permits between now and March 31st.
Well, moving on right now to new business, and takes us to first reading of a resolution 2020-01 relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $23,364 for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Exotic Species Program project, and request to schedule a public hearing on February 10th, 2020 during the regular city council meeting. So we are actually three motions here. The first one, I'm looking for a motion to waive the reading of the resolution in its entirety and to read by title only. So made by Councilor Cheney, seconded by Councilor Bounds. Any discussion? All in favor? 6 in the affirmative, it passes. The second, I'm looking for a motion to move a first reading of resolution RES 2020-01 relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $23,364 for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Exotic Species Program project. So made by Counselor Felch, seconded by Counselor Hamel. Any discussion? All those in favor? 6 in the affirmative, passes. The third is looking for a motion to move to schedule a public hearing on February 10th, 2020, during the regular city council meeting to gather public input prior to adoption. So made by Counselor Bounds, seconded by Counselor Haynes. Any discussion? Yes, Counselor Hamel?
I have a question. On the sheet, colored sheet there for the Department of Environmental Services, where it shows the different costs, grant award, local costs and that there. And there's 2 different treatments. One's herbicide and the other one is diver. We're doing the herbicide, correct?
We'll be doing two
Or
different,
both?
we'll be doing both. So some of it may depend on proximity to our water intake. As you recall, the Procelicor, the herbicide treatment, is something that we tested in one area 2 years ago, and we did one cove, I forget if it was Pickerel or Moulton, with the Procelicor. It was a little more expensive, but it dissipated very rapidly, and it was almost negligible in any sampling done even immediately after from where it was dropped, versus the other herbicide that we used was a product called 2,4-D, if I recall correctly. And that was a little less expensive, but it had a little more challenges. So we've done a couple of areas. And the other thing with the Procelicor is it has a much better guarantee rate. And so they'll actually come back and review what they did the year before. And if any areas need to be retreated again for lack of results, all we pay is for the mobilization costs, not for any of the chemical costs to it. So depending on which areas, we do have a map that Amy Smagula at that department does. She's kind of like a one-person army who does it all down there. And they identify, they map it out. We know what areas will be diver-assisted suction harvesting and what areas will be herbicide. We always coordinate with the Water Commission to make sure they're aware and are on board with what we're treating, how much in terms of acreage, the testing that is required to be done to make sure that our water intake stays safe. So, and some of this will happen in the spring before the summer, and some of it will happen post-Labor Day timeframe.
Okay. Now, the local cost that we have to come up with, that's obviously coming out of the account that we have for treatments of the lakes?
Yes, so we have $40,000 in the current year's budget.
Okay.
And since I've been here, we've kind of lumped all milfoil treatment together. It used to be an O-Pee-Chee Association member, so we just have one fund now. The folks at O-Pee-Chee, I know, will submit something as well as a request for the city to partner. DES will help them out with a component of their project as well. That neighborhood association around O-Pee-Chee is very organized, and they do a good job of fundraising themselves, so they'll typically come up with around 30% of whatever project that they're requesting, and then it would be at about a 30% city match. So the 40% match we got from DES in this particular grant is the highest percentage in a number of years. I think in the last couple of years we were down in the low to mid-20s, if memory serves me correct, and that's just based on how much money DES has and how many applicants and size of projects they get, and it's just a mathematical equation. So I'm not sure why we got the bump up to 40, but I'm not questioning it.
Are they still in Paugus Bay treating?
Yes, that's the area that we do predominantly on this grant here. And then there is a Winnisquam Watershed Association that we've started contributing, I think it was around $7,000 a year, maybe for the last year or maybe 2 years. And again, that's treating Lake Winnisquam. Some of the areas were not necessarily in Laconia, but they were up in the Meredith area, especially up near the point where it's shallower and the milfoil can catch hold. And obviously, we want to support the treatment up in that area of Meredith, because if milfoil is breaking free, it's coming with the currents and coming down. We've got a couple of spots in front of the Ahern State Park area that aren't significant yet, but are kind of on the radar for treating. So again, if we can head it off in Meredith, it's good money well spent for Laconia's interest as well.
That was kind of like my next question. What is the city or the state doing anything to contact the cities and towns around the lake for this same thing? Everything drains down through Paugus Bay for that whole lake.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, if there's milfoil coming from Wolfboro, it ends up in the Laconia area, so we gotta continually treat. So has the state gone out to inform these towns, or do they know that funds are available for them to start their own treatment, so it doesn't all end up in Paugus Bay or Peachy or?
Absolutely, yes, and a number of communities do fund these. I can think of one community on the Big Lake, I believe it's Molten Borough, I think budgets $200,000 a year for it. So you are correct that everything drains through the weirs and comes into Paugus Bay, and that's why it needs to be a regional approach
Right, exactly.
with it, not just Laconia, but plenty of other communities are focusing. I don't think there's any requirement that they have to. There's nothing, but I think most of them are stepping up and knowing the treasures that we have with the lakes and our water quality, and are stepping up to do their part. We've gotten our budget up to $240,000, which is still not enough, but it's baby steps that we've been adding to incrementally over the years.
Well, if each community did some, where it channels all down and through one access point, we may not have to treat as much.
Yep, and I also want to recognize a group that was formed about a year or so ago voluntarily, that is working with the marinas, working with some of the private condominium associations, the cottage colonies along Paugus Bay, reaching out to Southdown as well and trying to get contributions coming in. They're the ones who, it was Rich Tilton has been spearheading that with folks from Watermark Marine and East Coast Flightcraft and others. And some of the marinas have stepped up and made donations as well. So they're out there, pressing the need for the private participation, because again, it affects their real estate values and their ability to sell and rent and recreate on the water. So very pleased that they've been making some effort to raise some additional funds privately.
Great, thank you for that info, Scott.
You're welcome.
So any further discussion or questions? So we've had a motion, a second, that's ready for the vote. All those in favor of Resolution 2020-01, raise your hand. Any opposed? 6-0 in favor, the motion passes. Moving on to, under new business, 20.B, which is the first reading of ordinances 2020-235-41, :M-1, and 2020-235-70, :C-2, to amend the short-term lodging ordinance, adding a special exception provision, to amend the fee schedule to establish a fee for short-term lodging, and also to increase the fee for all abutter notices. Is Dean here? Dean, would you like to step up and address what we're working on here? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors. If you don't mind, I'm going to start with the fees first, because I think they're the easiest and quickest to explain. The current cost to notify abutters is just the mailing cost is $393, I think it is right now. It's going to $405 at the end of the month, and every year it seems to go up a little bit. Requesting that we just do a flat fee, $10, to cover the cost of that mailing, plus we have staff time, and we usually do subsequent mailings to abutters on a lot of applications, so we have further costs that are that the city's just been paying for. So the request is to go to a $10 flat fee, and if someone chooses to, if an applicant chooses to pay for the first class certified mailing themselves, then we'll just, credit them whatever the postage amount is. So that's number one. Number two is the fee for the short-term lodging. We had discussed this in the fall when we were going through the process, and I think we generally had a consensus that would be $250 for a 2-year permit. We need to establish that fee and get it, formally into the fee schedule. Any questions on those two items before I go into the short-term amendment? No? Okay. So as you recall, in December, when the council approved the short-term lodging ordinance, there was a request to
for staff to look at a special exception process. The special exception process would allow properties that are not covered by the 3 or 4 specific provisions in the current ordinance to potentially gain the ability to do this at their property through the special exception process. So there's kind of 2 steps to that. So there's the 41:M section, which is what got approved in December, and we're adding a section E to that. So right now we have a 1D, 1A through D, and we'll be adding a section E, and basically it's allowing it in the RS, the RG, the RR1, RR2, and the urban commercial districts by special exception. So we have the language there to amend the 41M-1. And then the 23570:C-2 is the current section that we have for special exceptions. And what in effect we are doing is creating a special exception list of criteria strictly for short-term lodging. And then for all other kinds of special exceptions, which there are a number of them elsewhere in the ordinance, they would use the existing criteria that's already specified. And the reason that we decided to create a special list, if you will, for the short-term lodging is that there are 2 or 3 criteria in the standard list that staff and legal counsel did not feel kind of apply to the short-term lodging question, and it may confuse the matter a little bit in front of the zoning board. And I didn't want to say, use this one for this one and use that one for that one. I think it's better to have 2 separate lists so that people are not looking at things kind of and mixing them together. So there are 4 set criteria that the applicants would have to address. One, that it's specifically authorized in the chapter, which it is. Request will not increase demand for municipal services. Any other special provisions set forth in the chapter are fulfilled. That goes back to the other criteria that we have in the short-term lodging ordinance. Things about smoke detectors, parking, trash removal, and those kinds of things, all of those provisions that are outlined. And D, the requested use will not create hazards to health, safety, or general welfare of the public. And then E is an either-or situation. So you have 2 statements there, and the applicant needs to meet and prove one of the 2. And the first one basically is saying that they've been doing short-term lodging at this location for a period of at least 5 years. This is to kind of try to take care of the situations where people may have been doing this in various situations for a time, even before there were the so-called online platforms. And or, number 2, that they can convince the zoning board that there is a general benefit to the community that rises above their own personal financial gain. Kind of, I guess, an example of that would be, we've had a couple of places up around the hospital that have been talking about the short-term lodging, where they're trying to provide lodging for visiting nurses and other professionals that come in for 2, 3, 4 week type things. Sometimes they in for even shorter periods of time. This would enable people that to show that there's a benefit to the community that's better than, and then of course the infamous Playhouse situation that was brought to our attention so well during the fall.
I think it's a famous playhouse, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Yes, would you agree, Neil?
Yes, thank you.
What playhouse are we talking about?
Must be the one.
So that would be the special exception process for short-term lodging. Any questions on that? All right, seeing none, thank you.
Couple of questions.
Why 5 years?
As opposed to what?
Opposed to 2 or 10?
Well, Mayor Engler had suggested 10, and we were looking at a number that is it's subjective no matter how you look at it. I mean,
get
you
that.
could make it 2, you could make it 5, you could make it 8. I mean, and any number is not right and it's not wrong. I think we were looking for a number that kind of goes before the general use of the short-term rental platforms, where before it became a business model, and it was more of, Johnny homeowner just trying to, pay a little, get a little money, as opposed to a investment type situation that we're in with some of these platforms now. So it's an arbitrary number, but there's a little bit of logic behind it from a standpoint of trying to get to a point in time that was before the internet caused all this problem for us.
Did you give any thought to language like not less than 5 years, or if the applicant can demonstrate continuous use for some period close to 5 years, or something like that? Or did you just pick 5 years and say that's going to be the number?
I think we're trying to keep it as simple as possible, and we're trying to keep it easy for us to confirm what the applicant is telling us.
Well, I guess I don't want to be hypercritical, because I know 5 years is arbitrary, so 4, so 6, so is any of those numbers. But I think that with meeting one of the 2 following criteria, you kind of give the applicant an opportunity to address, I've been in business I've been doing this for 4.5 years, this is what I look like, this is why I do it, this doesn't harm anybody, and so I guess I'm happier than I was with the original ordinance. I'm happier with these amendments as opposed to, what was that word? Never mind. With these amendments to it. So what's the procedure now? We're going to bring this to the planning board? What goes on? How does this get us there?
No, because this is
we can do
this
it
is a
from right here?
continuation of what the council started in December.
Yeah?
And so, yes, no, we don't need to go to planning board to do this amendment. You can schedule the public hearing for February 10th and then make the decision.
Do we have to
Anytime after
go
that.
through, waive the first reading and all of that? Or
Yes,
could we-
you not waive the first reading, but you need to do your first reading and then refer to a public hearing, yes.
Okay. We do that tonight?
Counselor Littman,
I'll make that
Yes.
motion.
that you would, and would you,
Waive the reading and get us to the public hearing.
is there a second?
Second.
Counselor Bounds, any further discussion on waiving the reading of these ordinances in their entirety and read by title only? Is that what we're going for? Yes, thank you. All those in favor? 6 votes in the affirmative, the motion passes. Looking for a motion to move a first reading of ordinances 2020-235-41, :M-1, and 2020-235-235-70, :C-2, creating a special exception process for short-term lodging and to amend the fee schedule authorized by 235-92, amending planning and zoning fees to create a $250 fee for short-term lodging applications, and amending the abutter notification fee for all abutter notifications for any type application to $10. We have a motion. Counselor Littman, seconded by Counselor Bounds. Any further discussion? All those in favor? 6 votes in the affirmative, the motion passes. And a third one, looking for a motion to move to schedule a public hearing on February 10th, 2020, during the regular city council meeting to gather public input prior to adoption. Counselor Felch moves, seconded by Counselor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion? 6 in the affirmative, the motion passes. Moving on to 20C, Airport Concession Agreement between Laconia Airport Authority, Avis Budget Car Rental LLC, a New Jersey LLC. This is as you can see from the staff report and the terms in front of you, this is might be identical to the original or to the previous contract with Avis Budget Rental Car LLC. The term of the concession agreement is 1 year in length, to be reviewed annually to ensure compliance with airport minimum standards. The agreed rate to be paid to the Laconia Airport Authority is 5% of the gross revenue resulting from the concessionaire's vehicle rental services at the airport, payable to Laconia Airport Authority to be applied to the operation of the airport. There's no cost incurred to the city on this. If I'm not mistaken, maybe Marv, you can help us on this. It results in about $13,000 a year. Is that right, to the airport authority?
Not Avis by itself, but the automotive rental.
The automotive rentals, yes. Okay, so I'm looking for a motion that would authorize Andrew Hosmer, Mayor of the City of Laconia, to sign the lease agreement between the Laconia Airport Authority and Avis Budget Car Rental LLC, a New Jersey LLC. Councilor Hamel making the motion. Is there a second? Councilor Cheney. Any further discussion about what's before the council right now? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion? 6 in the affirmative. Motion passes. (20D) is a sublease agreement between hangar owner Naratom S. Gruel and E. Propelled, Inc., having a principal place of business in Lowell, Mass. For discussion purposes, Naratom S. Gruel, or Nick Gruel, as he's known, owns a hangar located at 28 Airport Road in Laconia, on Laconia Airport Municipal Airport property. He desires to sublease the space in his hangar to E. Propelled, Inc. of Lowell, Mass. for the purpose of product testing and development. The proposed use of the hangar has received a, quote, does not object, unquote, response from New Hampshire DOT, Bureau of Aeronautics, and the FAA. The sublease agreement is for 5 years in length, to be reviewed annually to ensure compliance with airport minimum standards. The agreed rate is $12,000 per year, with adjustments according to the December CPI urban each successive year. There's no cost incurred by the city. The revenue generated by the lease agreement amounts to $12,000 for the first year base rental, payable to Naratom S. Gruel, who in turn will make payments to the Laconia Airport Authority for his annual lease payment to be applied to the operation of the airport. At a meeting on Thursday, January 16, 2020, the Laconia Airport Authority authorized Andrew Hosmer to sign the agreement as chair. The Airport Authority is seeking approval from the City Council for Andrew Hosmer to sign the agreement. Looking for a motion to authorize Andrew Hosmer, Mayor of the City of Laconia, to sign the sublease agreement between a hangar owner, Naratom S. Gruel, and E. Propelled, Inc., having a principal place of business in Lowell, Mass. So made by Councilor Felch, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any further discussion? All those in favor of this motion? Seeing 6 votes in the affirmative, none opposed, the motion passes. Thank you. 20E is a request from the Laconia Parks and Recreation Commission to reallocate funds from the capital outlay for the Opeechee Walkway of a total of $20,000 to fund a portion of the Robbie Mills netting. It's noted that the Winnipesaukee Muskrats will also pay a portion of this, Memorial Park netting, and a portion of the Pearly Pond improvements. So the commission would like to reallocate that $20,000 into the following projects. Robbie Mills Sports Complex netting around the baseball field for safety reasons in regards to line drive foul balls. The total for this project is $18,000, and the Winnipesaukee Muskrats have stated they would provide $5,000 for the project, leaving the city with $13,000 to fund this project. Memorial Park netting is to protect 2 neighbors from baseballs that damage their property. They have had their homes and vehicles damaged by foul balls by the hundreds, and the commission wishes to fix the problem before the start of the baseball season. They would like to use $5,000 for this project, and if there is a balance remaining, they would like to revisit and appoint the funds to another project. In regards to Pearly Pond improvements, Pearly Pond improvements would receive the remaining $2,000 to be put toward the upcoming project once approved by the state. No additional fiscal impact to the city. Parks and Recreation Department recommends that the city reallocate these funds as stated above for the betterment of our parks. This report was submitted by Amy Lovisek, Director of Recreation Facilities, Laconia Parks and Recreation. I see that she is here this evening as well, been waiting patiently for this. So right now, I'm looking for a motion to authorize the reallocation of funds from the capital outlay of the O-Pee-Chee Walkway for a total of $20,000 to fund a portion of the Robbie Mills netting, Memorial Park netting, and a portion of the Pearly Pond improvements. So moved by Councilor Hamel, seconded by Councilor Felch. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Haynes.
Amy, as far as Memorial Park is concerned, is that going to be higher, the netting?
We are actually looking into that. We've discussed it with the commission, and what they wanted to do was on the city side of Memorial Park Road, we maintain a portion of that property that they are abutting. One of the neighbors actually has a net that goes up
Right.
about 18 feet or 25 feet maybe. They still go up and over, surprisingly, but I think these are people that are on the stronger end, adults playing ball versus the middle schoolers and Babe Ruth, that type of a player. So what our proposal was is to put up some netting on our part of the land to protect. What's happening is that the ball is going up and over the backstop, bouncing in the road, and then going into their property, for the most part. It's not the line drives. We do have netting up there at the field itself. So we are trying to protect with the line drive foul balls. However, it's the ones that are going up and over and bouncing and then going into their property.
Mr. Mayor, if I- Amy, the only other thing is, and you know that I have been in constant, the neighbors have been in constant, can we just make sure that the netting stays intact if there's going to be fall activity?
Absolutely.
Before
And it would be our
The netting has come
responsibility.
down and then their houses,
Absolutely.
okay, that would be
Absolutely.
fine. And I'm sure the neighbors appreciate that.
Well, what they would like to see is something a little bit higher. I don't think they were as thrilled with my ideas as the commission was. So we are looking into other possibilities as well. But something needs to be done before spring.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Any further discussion or questions? No? Thank you, Amy. So there's a motion on the table with no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion, say aye, raise your hands. 6 votes in favor, the motion passes. And now we can move on to unfinished business. I think there's none. Council comments. Are you unfinished business or council comments?
I don't know whether to call it council comments or, see, I get close now, or unfinished business. But if you'll recall, last year, there was a proposal that was going to go to committee as it relates to parking and paid parking, and whether the city was going to consider doing any of that. The rough proposal had been to keep the Pleasant Street, Main Street area on non-paid parking, 2-hour parking or 3-hour parking, and consider parking fees for the municipal parking lot, parking fees for the downtown parking lot next to the church, parking fees for the spaces next to the railroad station, and other considerations. There was a meeting set up between the former mayor and the downtown, some of the downtown merchants. And we were anticipating that the downtown merchants would come back with some numbers, letting us know how many employees they had in the downtown, what kind of impact that would have, and for whatever reason, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, nobody ever got those numbers. So we didn't really get that input, and things got a little crazy with the Colonial and everything else, so we never really addressed that proposal. Now that there's been change in the council, now that there's been a change in, I'm just looking for some kind of consensus from the council about whether we should revive this proposal and go forward with it, in which case I would look at the next meeting to schedule a committee meeting on the parking issue and move forward. You know me, you know that I've been an advocate for some kind of parking fee in the city of Laconia for some time. It's my view that the entire city of Laconia shouldn't bear the burden of cleanup and maintenance for all the parking for those businesses operating downtown or elsewhere in the city. That's my view. So I'm looking to get a sense from the council at some point, it doesn't have to be tonight, but I'm going to put it on the agenda, as to whether we should consider implementing a fee structure for parking. Always a popular subject.
So noted.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering, David, do you think that that could possibly be part of strategic planning and goals, to include that as we move forward in the year 2020?
I don't object to that, but making it a part of the strategic goals, which we'll meet on what, January 30th or sometime like that, that's fine. But I want to get a sense from this council on whether that's possible. We can discuss it on January 30th. I don't care when we discuss it, but I do want to get a sense of what kind of support there is for it, whether we should abandon it, whether we should move forward with it, what we should do. So having a discussion of, at our strategic meeting, our what are we going to do tomorrow meeting is what I call it, is fine with me. I don't care how we do it. I just want to know what kind of support there is for that. Because if there isn't any support for it, even though I support it, I'm not going to move forward with it. I may be slow, but I'm not stupid.
But I'm believing that we need the facts and the numbers before we can come to any conclusions.
I think that we've got facts and numbers sufficient to at least make a preliminary determination as to where we're at. We've been throwing this ball against the wall for 3 or 4 years now, so you know.
So I guess what I would say,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but maybe what I would suggest is that if there are some facts and numbers, we can reduce them to writing, if I'm sure they are already. And perhaps at our next meeting, we can discuss, or at some point here, discuss whether we're going to put it on the agenda. I don't remember whether we had a consensus, prior council, that we were going to bring this up for discussion. I just don't recall, but I'm all for discussing something, but.
We had scheduled it for a committee meeting.
Yeah.
That was what had happened. In the interim, Ed, the former mayor, had met with members of the downtown. And their proposal was, we're going to get you some numbers about what the impact is going to be, how many employees we've got, what kind of structure that's going to have on our businesses collectively, and that never happened. So, I mean, we can still have that discussion with the downtown employers and with folks throughout the city about this concept of paid parking, but I don't want to keep pushing it off. I want the council to take a position about what we're going to do about the concept of paid parking. If we're not going to do it, fine. We're going to do it, let's do it.
Counselor Felch?
I would say we definitely would like to hear what the impact's going to be, what the merchants downtown.
Okay.
I know we never heard back from them, but I'd like to hear from them and what the impact's going to be before we make that
Good
decision.
luck with that. I'm not saying that, I don't want to hear that. All I'm saying is like that's one way to avoid the issue altogether, which I would imagine there's some people who have businesses downtown and in other areas of the city who just want nothing to do with the idea of paid parking. And if that's the consensus of the council, fine. And I'm just here to raise the issue and push it forward. That's what I'm doing.
Well, being new to the council, I'd like to hear from them, even if it's a quick get downtown, talk to them myself. I don't have a problem with that. So I would say we can also talk a little about our planning session.
Well,
And-
one of the ways to hear from them, Councilor Felch, is to schedule a hearing.
A public hearing.
Do a committee meeting hearing or some kind of a hearing and say, this is what we're proposing. Come on in and tell us what you think.
And that's fine.
Counselor Cheney?
I see that the parking issue is under the government operations and ordinances, which is Councilor Bounds' committee. I was kind of hoping we could impose upon him.
I listened to the meeting last meeting that I missed because I was stuck up on the hill on the ice. And I listened to the mayor invite everybody to appoint me to whatever committee it was. This was your opportunity.
Bingo.
So I'm now Government Operations Committee. I'm the
Congratulations.
chair.
Yes.
You're the chair, and I'm on it with you, so.
You are on it
we'll
with
talk
me.
about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm just letting you all know, because I don't want to, out of the blue, just say, let's schedule a meeting on this. I want some discussion on it. I want to know where you're coming from and some input before I just say, let's have a meeting.
But I think it's fair to ask that you make an effort to touch base with the folks downtown and see if you can get that information for us. If you can't, then I'll be more supportive of the idea of just moving ahead, but.
I'll make the effort, but we've made the effort.
Okay,
But
but
I'll make the
one
effort
last.
again. I'll make one last leap off the,
How about this, Counselor Bounds? Why don't we schedule your committee of government operations and ordinances? That's it, right?
Yeah.
That would come under that. Why don't you schedule a meeting for that, all right? And maybe task the other members to go out and maybe get you a little feedback and see what they hear as well. Because I think there are plenty of people downtown that want to weigh in on this. Then, based on that feedback, you make the recommendation from the committee as to whether we should put it on an agenda. So, just, we've got a new council here. I know we don't want to start at square one with everything, but maybe take a step back here and solicit some input, and then let's move it forward, either yes or no.
I'll be willing to do that. And what I would do is, at the next meeting, I would schedule the meeting and talk to the committee and find out who wants to be tasked with the idea of,
I'm sure he's the one that.
I'll come
you're
down
in the
and walk.
government operations.
No.
Thank you, Counselor Felch.
I'll come down and walk the town with you, Dave, anytime you want.
Thank you. Okay, but I think.
Life is getting so much fun. I'll walk with Counselor from Ward 6, yay.
All right, so I think that's a pretty good plan. I look forward to following up with you on that and getting it on the agenda.
So if we can just remind me to put that meeting on the agenda next time, because I'm old and senile and I'll forget.
Our February 10th meeting, though, it's going to be fairly busy, isn't it? And
This is a 1 minute.
Go ahead. And 11th is a busy day for us here as well, so.
Yes. It's primary day.
Right. Counselor Felch.
So I do have one more thing. Through
I like that.
through my campaign and since I've been elected, I've had a lot of complaints about Jefferson Street in Lakeport. So I'm hoping we can consider doing something about that street in the next budget. And it's in really rough shape.
Okay. Absolutely. I see the city manager making a note right now, so.
Jefferson Street. You notice I'm not complaining about Prospect Street.
Any other unfinished business or, so right now, I'm going to make a motion to go into non-public session. I don't believe the council will be addressing any other public matters this evening. And city manager, should I read out the RSA portion here?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm going to go into non-public session. It'll be for two different items. One pursuant to RSA 91-A:3, Roman 2, parentheses D, consideration of the acquisition, sale, or lease of real or personal property. And our second would be RSA 91-A:3, Roman 2, parentheses E, consideration or negotiation of pending claims or litigation which has been threatened in writing or filed against this body. Is that a motion?
Yes.
So moved.
So made by Counselor Haynes, second by Counselor Bounds. Any discussion? All in,
Your roll call on that.
okay?
Gotta call the roll.
You do the roll call.
Counselor Cheney.
Yes.
Counselor
Got
Bounds.
his bag ready to go, I'm sorry.
Counselor Bounds.
Yes.
Counselor Littman.
Yes.
Counselor Haynes.
Yes.
Counselor Hamel.
Yes.
Counselor Felch.
Yes.
Mayor Hosmer.
Yes.
And just for clarification, that motion was to go into non-public for the first one dealing with the real estate. The council will have that discussion. They will come out, take action on whether or not they choose to seal the minutes, and then there'll be a new motion with another roll call to go into non-public for the second matter.
Terrific. Thank you.
I thought I was going home.
Well, you